Your greatest asset are people. The greatest asset you have, whether you're in business or whether you are, listen, where were we? My wife and I just went to a restaurant the other day, and it took an extremely long time. It was a local business. Extremely long time to have a server even come to our table. So I actually grabbed the person who was bussing and said, it's been about 20 minutes. We haven't had anybody come to the table. Is it possible you could go get our server? Server comes around the corner like in 5 minutes and another 5 minutes. And she's carrying a tray. And she said, I'm sorry, we just can't find workers. They were so understaffed that she said there's nobody even working the bar. There's only one cook out back. And there's only, I think they had 3 or 4 servers in the entire restaurant. Now, what we have to realize is you need workers. You need people. People are your greatest asset. If you're in a church, your people are your greatest asset. Because if you have no people, you have no church. If it's just you and your wife and your 3 children who are all underage, you really don't have a church. You have a family, a small group, we'll call it. But to have a church, you got to have followers. So you've got to pay attention on the certain things. Now, let's talk about the third challenge that we have as leaders, and it's called rejection. When you genuinely love people and you've invested in people, and then they turn on you, how do you handle that? This is a genuine challenge. And this is not just, come on now, this is not just ministry. This is regular companies. This is a business people are dealing with the exact same thing. I used to be actually trained by a man who was a 41-year executive with Prudential. And he said one of the great challenges they have in insurance was to hire somebody actually cost them about $100,000. So by the time you hire them, you interview them, you train them, and then you pay them because they're not making money yet. They don't have clients. By that full time, you've sunk about $100,000 into every single an employee. And he said it's amazing that you can invest, and even when you see that they're special, you invest more time in them, and then when they're done being trained, they do what? They just get up and leave. They just reject everything. And there's an emotion involved with that if you genuinely love people. If you're a pastor, a minister of the gospel, you had better get used to this. This is the rest of your life. This is what you're going to deal with. Why? Because if Jesus had people reject him, you're going to have people reject him. Watch who rejected Jesus. This is very good. His brothers and sisters all rejected him. They mocked him. They made fun of him. And it wasn't until after his death and resurrection that they actually started to believe in him. His own countrymen rejected him. He was sent for the Jews, yet they rejected him. Then, to cap it all off, his father turned on him. His father turned away while he was on the cross. Why hast thou forsaken me? So Jesus dealt with all, I forgot about Judas, that's a whole nother rejection. How about Peter denying him 3 times? We can go through all of the different rejections that Christ experienced, and we've got to come to a conclusion very clearly that if you're going to be a leader on any capacity, that rejection is going to be part of your life. So rejection isn't something that you are going to be shocked at. The response to rejection is what you have to first plan. You must plan your emotional response for rejection. If you don't plan it, when it happens, it takes your breath away. I remember I was pastoring in my last church, and I had a great board, and our church was growing, and I had just gotten rid of the organ and gotten rid of the hymn books, and we went to more upbeat music. And one day I got a call from my elder, and he was a great board member, and we spent a lot of time with he and his family, and we had spent a lot of time with their family, helping them grow, helping them out of their issues and their problems. And wow, they were family to us. So I got a phone call and said, Pastor, I'd like to meet you up at the church. I said, sure, when? He goes, how's now? Would you mind coming up now? I said, sure. I got my car, drove up to the church, and as I'm pulling up the driveway, which is over 400 feet, the parking lot had more than one car in it. In fact, the parking lot was almost full. So I walked in the door, and he met me at the door, and he goes, well, we just want to talk with you. And I'm thinking in my head, we? I see the we's. They're in the parking lot car, we. I turn the corner to the sanctuary, and there's 35 to 40 people, and with a congregation of 125, 35 to 45 people is a lot of people. And he said to me, we've been discussing. I said, well, what was your discussion? The discussion was that we want the old hymn books back and the organ back in the church, or we're leaving. Well, everybody in that room pretty much had gotten saved under our ministry at that point in time. These folks hadn't, the mom and dad hadn't, but the boy did, and the rest of the family we had brought into the kingdom. So now all these people that we had invested all this time, all this love, all this focus on to love them, to build them, to strengthen them, are now creating a coup. Where, Pastor, if you don't do what we want, we're taking our money and our bodies and going home. So I said to myself, I have a problem. I feel rejection right now. Don't these people realize they wouldn't be serving God if God hadn't sent me to this place? And now they're demanding. Well, that one family, their weekly tithe was my salary. And I had to make a decision at this point. What am I going to do? So I kindly looked at the couple that caused the meeting, and I said, I love you. We're not going back. Please don't let the door hit you on the way out. Probably could have said it better, but I was young. But they left, and thank God, the money didn't change. But the emotions were still very real. Has anybody ever had a bad tooth before? Where all of a sudden you have a nerve being revealed, and it doesn't matter how many Tylenol you take, or Ambisol you put on, or how many times you stick your head under very cold water just praying that it would stop, and it just is throbbing. You can't sleep, you can't eat, you can't think. That's the emotions of rejection. It's just like somebody takes a fist and punches it into your gut. Now remember, you can never feel rejection of people you've never invested in. If you have no interest, no deposit, you don't care if the bank's been robbed. So when people leave because they're mad, but yet you don't really know them except shaking their hand, you don't even notice they're gone. But genuine rejection comes when you have spent all the time needed to make sure that they would be successful in life, and they haven't paid you for it. Well, I pay my tithe. Your tithe don't come close to paying the time that many people have taken. I remember one time, you don't mind examples, do you? One time we had an individual my wife had worked with and literally led her to Jesus. The whole family got saved. The ex got saved. The parents got saved. I go through the list. The uncles and aunts got saved. She went to Bible school. She actually was hired on staff at one point in time. And then one day, I married her and her husband, dedicated their children. Oh my goodness. And one day, her family member passed, and my wife went and literally scrubbed the bathroom floors. There was more than once we found out, because he was starting a new company, that they had no food as a family, and my wife and I would go and stock their cupboards with food. They had no vehicle, so my wife and I would lend them our second vehicle. And then one day they just upped and said, "We don't like you anymore. In fact, we hate you, and we're leaving the church, and we're taking all of our family with us." And up they went, off they went. They went to another church, spoke very poorly of us. And my wife and I just kept asking the simple question: what did we actually do that was so evil? What did we actually do that would cause somebody to push rejection? And the real question was, because whether you're human, you all are human, correct? If you're human, then it must affect you. Well, I don't care if people leave my life. Then you are on the opposite paradigm, and you're in as bad shape as they are. You should be vulnerable enough to be hurt. So when you're hurt, you have to make decisions in your life how you're going to deal with this rejection. I was dealing with a businessman, and he and his partner, they were partners, were very close, and very close for decades. Their company was very successful. And then one day the partner turned on him. And he said, I've never done anything wrong to him. I've never treated him badly. I've never taken anything out. In fact, I keep putting more of my salary in to make the business even more successful. I don't understand why this is happening. Listen, get used to it. Because if you're going to do and work with people, it's never going to change. Oh, that's right. That means being a leader. Because a leader with no followers is just a person going for a walk. So this is part of who you are. This is part of learning how to deal with the rejection inside of you. So these are some of the things why did they go? What did I do? These are questions that always ran through my head. And they always talk badly. Can I give you a hint real quickly? It's usually when somebody rejects you, they have to villainize you. So what does that mean? That means they have to lay their head down on the pillow and validate in their own head why they can treat you so abusively. So what they have to do is they have to make you bad to make themselves feel good. It's called villainization. And that is a normal process that happens with the person rejecting the other person. That's how they can be so mean, because you're so evil. They have to do that in their heads, or they can't sleep. Remember, you have to have a good conscience. So I've asked myself, I don't understand. Has anybody ever said that? I don't understand. I don't get it. Have they forgotten all the things I did for them? We filled their cupboards. We literally housed their kids. They spent time with our family. We considered them family. We lent them our car. We paid their mortgage so it wouldn't be repossessed. Don't they understand what we did? Then you go to, how can I fix it? And then they won't even talk to you. But why? These are all emotions that run through your head. These are all emotions that you're going to feel. These are all the questions that are going to race through your brain. And you need to know that you're not alone. Every leader, whether you're secular and or ministry, you are going to have rejection. And these are thoughts that you're going to have because your own brain can't wrap around. And finally, you're going to come to the conclusion that I will never understand. I will never make sense of this. This will never compute. So therefore, now you're going to have to learn how to deal with the emotions of rejection to make sure that you are going to remain healthy for the people that have not rejected you. Are you out there? You're going to cry. Maybe not out loud. Maybe not in front of people. But if you genuinely love people, you will cry. If you don't cry, and I'm not a crier, so I don't cry out loud. I just really want to sing that song right now, but I'm going to withstand. Emotionally, you are disturbed. And you have to bring peace to your own heart. And you also cannot equate their rejection as an impact on your value. Let me say it again. You cannot allow their rejection to be an impact on your value. If you do, you now will slide into the position of needing people to need you and want you. When you get there, you are doomed. Because the next rejection you experience, you notice I didn't say if, I said the next rejection that you experience will terminate you. So this rejection is something that's very real within leaders' mindsets. You can't beat them up. I'm not saying that's not what we want to do. But you can't beat them up. I'm not saying that's not what you want to do. So it's not that you're not going to have a lot of vindictive, validatable, destructive opportunities run through your brain. Just because a bird flies around your head doesn't mean you got to let them nest in your hair. You've got to make decisions that even though these thoughts are running through, that you must bring into captivity every thought and imagination that would raise itself up against Christ. Because if you allow those things to start running through your brain, you're going to fall into the next challenge we're going to talk about, which is called bitterness. You also cannot allow yourself to go into the guarded stage. What's the guarded stage? They hurt me, no one's going to hurt me like they did, ever. You literally have placed yourself in a posture that you are not going to truly be usable. Because people, especially this generation, demand genuineness. You cannot be genuine if you don't like them. Or if you're in such a guarded position that they can't touch you and you can't touch them, they recognize that you are sick. Now, if you remember, my staff that's been here, with the last Judas kiss that I had, that was a really good one. And if you remember me sitting down in staff meeting one day and saying to you, I'm not all right. I was being transparent to you. I'm not okay right now. And I want you to recognize that when you do feel the sting of rejection, it is not a 24-hour bug. It is not even a 7-day flu. Sometimes it takes an elongated time to work through it in your own heart. Remember, when you feel rejection, what's happening is somebody's telling you that you are unimportant, that you are unloved, that you are vicious, that you are mean, and that you are not worth, and everything you did for them is disavowed. Well, that right there, if that doesn't touch you, if that doesn't attack value, because you're going to get angry. You're going to go through what we call the grieving process. Does everybody understand the grieving process? When we talk about grieving process, we usually talk about it concerning someone physically dying. But like divorce, rejection is far worse than someone dying. Why? Because they're still living. They're still in your life. They might even still be pushing the bruise. So you've got to make a decision that you are not going to step over and out of loving people genuinely. It takes time. I think I told you last week about the man that I'd set in order at a church, and he found some evangelists coming through town who prophesied to him and messed the whole thing up. I'm talking like, and I had set myself in as the overseer of the work, and I had the final decision if I saw them doing something foolish. And so they did something very foolish. I had them in a hotel. I had them with about 65 people-ish and leaders. I had a great worship band there, and they were at the hotel. The evangelist came in, prophesied to them. You don't want Pastor Spencer. All he wants is your money. You need to follow me. I move in the gifts of the Spirit. I move in the power of God. We need to move you out of the hotel. Let's go look for a building. They found a building on Clinton Street, and it was horrific. I got a phone call. The phone call was from my worship leader saying, Pastor, we're in big trouble because the place that they're going to move us to is not even big enough to house the amount of people that we have in the church. And Pastor, the bathroom, Pastor, is like one of those at an old Sunoco station. You got to back into it. Backing into it means it's so small that you can't turn around in it. To the pure, all things are pure. So here we are. I leave the ministry early that I'm at, and I come back to meet with them. And I said, I want to remind you, gentlemen and lady, that I have the authority to override the decisions you make. If I see they're going to be terminal, I want you to go back to the hotel. And they looked at me. Every one of these people have been born again in our ministry. Every one of them. Every one of them were living like hell, living for the devil, and got saved under our ministry. They were my spiritual kids. And they looked at me and said, we no longer see you as our oversight. We have now adopted this other individual. We are now changing the name of the church, and we're moving on. Well, I mean, it's pretty good rejection when you feel it from your own kids. So I went back to evangelism. I was on the road anyways. Moving, God was moving, had a great time. One day I was in that town, and I went up to a man and a woman's house that we were friends with there, and I walked in, grabbed, got them hugs, and behind me, in walks this dude, the pastor dude. And he goes up to give me a hug. This is like 4 or 5 months later, I think. And I looked at him and said, dude, back up. I'm going to punch you right in the face. I'm not over this thing yet. And he said, well, I thought we were good. I said, what? Are you like ignorant? You don't get what you did? Well, no, because they what? Validate. People have to validate to sleep. Oh, come on now. They've got to, because if they don't, they can't sleep. Probably about 3 years later, I got a phone call. That guy had gotten all the money out of him that he wanted. And he says, I'm realizing that I made a mistake. Can you come and meet me? I met him at his office. I had already forgiven him at that point in time because if not, remember, when you're not going to forgive, you're going to destroy yourself. So I had already forgiven him, but we hadn't made it right face to face. And he said, I apologize. We made it right. And things moved on from there. So I want you to know that this has not happened once, this has not happened twice, this has not happened 3 times, this has not happened 4 times. I've been in ministry over 30 years. I can count at least 6 to 7 solid times where they weren't just somebody leaving the church, but it was a genuine, come on now, a genuine rejection because they knew you beyond just shaking their hand. You had invested in them, you had loved them, you had developed them, you had matured them, and then they turned on you. So you've got to know that this is coming. And you've got to be okay with saying, okay, I'm going to be willing to deal with this issue. Because if no one talks plainly to you, you're going to be so shocked the first time. Well, I'll be honest. Most people that I know that leave the ministry, this is why they leave the ministry. Because they felt rejection and they didn't even know it was going to come. They thought everyone was going to love them. They might love them to death. They forgot about the death part. But they won't always love you. How do I deal with it? Number 1, they're not your people. I think Jake says it this way. He says, those who stay cannot leave, and those who leave could not stay. You've got to know that you and I, as leaders, we're called to shepherd people, but they're not our sheep. God did not call us to love the sheep. He called us to feed the sheep. So when a pastor takes possession or a ministry takes possession of that, then what they're actually doing is they're possessing something that is not theirs to own. When you own something that is not yours, it's called stealing. And there's always pain when you steal. The quicker you really surrender the fact that these are God's people or God's business. Well, Pastor, I own a company. You do or God does? Because your call might not be fivefold, but your call might be a business person. So is it your business or God's business? Is it your company or God's company? Are they your workers or God's workers? Because how you view it is how you treat it. Questions concerning rejection? Question?
Can't be close to the person. How do I still love them and show the love of Christ without them being wondering why everything's so different, why we can't go back to the relationship we had before?
Awesome question. Just because you forgive doesn't mean the trust is rebuilt. You've heard me talk about it before, but trust is like a bank. When the bank is empty, the only way to fill the bank is to make deposits. The more deposits you make, the larger the value of the bank account. So when someone gives you Judas kiss, comes back and wants to re-kiss, I'm sorry, you might come close, but you're not going to get that close. We're going to COVIDize you. We're going to have a shield right here. So when you start spitting, you're going to hit the shield and not me. I do want to say this very clearly. The first time somebody rejects you is hard. The second time is easier. The third time is easiest. So they have to rebuild trust. You never put your hand back under the hammer unless you know that they can finally hit the nail head. And that takes trust. So sometimes the relationship can never and will never be the same. But sometimes you can. Now with me, more than likely you can, because I'm a glutton for punishment. We have chosen that cycle of love. Every time you love, you become vulnerable. Every time you become vulnerable, it's inevitable. You will be hurt. And every time you get hurt, you must forgive or you cannot love again. This is part of my wife and I. This is our lifestyle. We are not pain-free, but after a while, your pain tolerance rises. The more your pain tolerance rises, then you're able and willing to trust people who have done literally rejection in your life, but yet wise enough to know when you can see the signs. Remember, rejection never happens immediately. The initial signs of rejection is dishonor. I use this class in more than one way, to be honest with you. Can I be honest with you? I've never told anybody this, but I'm going to be honest with you. I use this class to generate dishonor. Usually when someone first starts coming to the class, it's like, wow, that's really, really good. Wow, those are great principles. Wow, I love that. Wow, I'm growing. Wow, that's exciting. But then usually after about a year or two, they don't show up as often. Or they got to get up and go to the bathroom every single time. Or they sit there and just play on their phone. Now, I'm not saying if you're on your computer, you're on your phone. That's what I'm saying. I understand that. But I'm talking like you can see dishonor because now they're not even paying attention. They're typing when they should be listening. I have learned over the years to identify dishonor, which then enables me to identify a soon rejection. People dishonor before they reject. Say it again. People dishonor before they reject. So if I can catch dishonor, I know rejection is coming. Why? We said it last week, I believe. Correct. Dishonor separates and disavows, where honor brings access. And dishonor is a heart issue, not an outward manifestation issue. So if I can watch an outward manifestation, they don't even know that I can see it, but I'm looking for it. Because if I see dishonor manifesting on the outside, then I know inside they no longer honor me, which means they no longer honor your words. They no longer honor your wisdom. They no longer honor your anointing. They no longer honor your gifts. They're tolerating you. At that moment, I automatically start to step back, so when the rejection comes, it's not as painful. That's really good right there. I see that hand in the back. I want to remind everybody online, if you would like to comment or have a question, we have someone monitoring right now, so you can type it in.
Let's say you were the one that made an oopsie daisy and rejected somebody else or like hurt them in some way, how do you go back rebuilding trust with the person that you rejected or hurt?
Let's first ask the basic question was it on purpose?
Let's say yeah.
Okay, if it's on purpose, you might not ever be able to be back where you were. Or it's elongated, a long period of time. Let's take a husband who cheats on his wife. When they come to my counseling, I usually tell them it's a year. Usually it's the guy's like, I don't know, man, I said I was sorry. What more can I do? You know, they should be over it by now. It's been 6 months. Excuse me, are you dumb? I told you how long it's going to take, at least a year, rebuilding the trust bank. If it was not on purpose, it's easier to rebuild the trust bank because they can feel the genuineness of your heart in genuine repentance because you can explain to them what you did and they'll identify with it. Now, if there are wounded people, then you are going to be rejected anyways. If they're healthy people, they can see that it was not intentional and will genuinely work through it. Questions? It's good stuff, isn't it? Wow, it's late. You got to talk. Dead air is bad air.
What do you do if you have a Judas kiss, but you're supposed to forgive them like Joseph did when he was Pharaoh with his brothers?
Forgiveness doesn't mean that you trust them. I was saying that earlier. So you have to forgive. Sometimes forgiveness is process. You have to forgive, or you've sold a part of your mind and your heart to them. They now take up residence. They now own property in your heart. You now will be owned by them. So forgiveness is for you, not really for them. Question.
If you see someone pulling away and kind of like stepping into dishonor at times, or let me just ask this, why would you not just confront it and get that in order?
You can definitely confront it. I had hired a staff member. The staff member came, was seasoned, and elated to be in the leadership training. Stood multiple times and said, in all of my 18 years of ministry, no one has ever invested this much in me. Nobody has ever spoke this truth to me. Nobody has ever, you need to listen. He would say that constantly. And then I started watching as he would march in the parking lot during working hours. Then I would watch, no longer paying attention, in staff meeting. And I knew he actually thought he was invisible. A person that's willing to manifest outward dishonor, that believes they're invisible, what you can see is only the tip of the iceberg. So if the heart has twisted that deeply, to untwist it is usually never going to occur. Now, I have had times when people, Pastor Dan, I'm just going to throw you under the bus. This is many years ago. We were standing in the hallway, and Pastor Dan said something very dishonorable to me, and my head went, and he saw my head go. By the way, if you're a staff member and you see my head go, you're fired. It's just the way it is. You're gone. You don't even have to question it. You might as well just go empty your desk. Because at that point, it tipped. And my head went, and he went, and I saw it in his eyeballs. And he repented, and it was genuine. And he's never done it since. That's different. than watching somebody who thinks they're invisible being dishonorable. Questions? Yes. What do you mean by invisible was the question. Invisible means they are so, how do I say this properly? They are so self-absorbed, they are so ignorant of their own manifestation of actual actions of their body language that they actually believe no one can tell what they're actually doing or thinking. It's called self-delusion. They actually believe that everything they're doing is secretive, like pulling people in their office, saying, listen, I don't agree with Pastor Spencer either. You should just come to me when you have a problem. Absalom is always dumb and ultimately will hang by his own hair. So an invisible person is one that believes that no one identifies really what their heart is manifesting. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, but the body reacts. Your body communicates. It's good stuff today. Questions? We only got through one. Thank you very much for participating with the Empowering Pastors and Leaders training today. We will pick up next week on the challenge of resentment and bitterness.